Welcome to the NPTE Final Frontier podcast, helping one student at a time. Visit NPTEFF.com to enroll today so you can pass tomorrow. Thank you for joining us here on the NPTE Final Frontier podcast. My name is David.
And my name is Emily. Today, we will be discussing the week before the NPTE and really diving into some do's and don'ts for that week before the exam. So first, something you should do. Do taper your studying and don't panic. Now, I know that is much easier said than done, and so does David, but it really is one of the most important things that you guys can do. Tapering. Well, what does that mean? It's the final week before the exam. This is not the week to be learning new topics, but instead refining those topics, spending more time on those big hitters like cardiopulmonary, neuro, and musculoskeletal, and focusing in on maybe some areas of weakness or areas that you tend to find very challenging on practice exams, or just some content topics that maybe you've always struggled with throughout your curriculums. That's what you should be focusing your time and attention on. And you should be starting to study less and less each day leading up to the exam. And you should not be spending time studying the day before the exam. Tapering really is so important. If any of you are athletes, just like a sporting event, right? You don't want to be practicing 24/7 leading up to your big game. You need that time to rest and reset to make sure you don't make silly mistakes and overlook practice questions or the final exam questions in this standpoint. What do you think about tapering, David?
I think that it's very important, especially as you mentioned, heading into the exam. You don't want to do every single thing that you can do with studying wise. You don't want to study every single thing that is inside of a textbook heading up into that examination, maybe 1 week out. But I think something very important is you can always use specific time slots when you're preparing for this. So whether it's in the morning or the evening, whenever you have availability, have some uninterrupted, like 1 hour, 2 hour chunks of time where you can dedicate to this tapering. And sometimes it could be maybe the method of 15 on, 15 off, or 30 on, 15 off, something like that. And then also, as you know, Emily, and I know very well, you got to be flexible. You need to have flexibility with your schedule. You need to have flexibility with the tapering process. How flexible were you with your preparation with the tapering aspect?
With tapering, I really did hold myself accountable because using Final Frontier myself, I know the instructors really reiterated the importance of not studying, especially the day before the exam, and the importance of kind of really tapering that week of. It's not something I wanted to do, and it wasn't easy for me to taper because I think a lot of the times as students, we think the more we're studying, the better that is for us. But I really trusted the process and I trusted what Final Frontier had said. So I did taper. I held myself responsible with that. And I cannot be more proud of myself for doing that, but also happy with that outcome because it really does make a huge difference. And when it comes to flexibility, I think it's also just the importance of adjusting the schedule as needed, especially the week before the exam. Don't be hard on yourselves. Things can happen and adjust as needed. You've already been putting in countless hours and weeks studying. This is not the time to think you're trying to make up for lost time. You will succeed that day of the exam, and it's important to not be too hard on yourself.
Yeah, don't be hard on yourself. And also with the tapering process and trying to narrow it down, choose quality over quantity when it comes to your studying time. So what that means is just because you have that time slotted in there, like 2 hours, doesn't necessarily mean that that 2 hours was productive 2 hours. I would rather you have quality over, you can have quality 30 minutes of hardcore studying, focusing on those topics like what Emily mentioned before with the big three, MSK, neuro, cardio, focusing on something within that, as opposed to being all over the place. And maybe sometimes you're focused, sometimes you're not, and 2 hours comes by and you're done. Quality is so important. What's your experience with the quality aspect?
Yeah, so I was actually just trying to reiterate a point you made earlier that I think ties in with quality studying, and that is using specific times to allocate for uninterrupted study breaks. I am a huge morning person. That's when I would study the best. That's when I would retain my information the best. I am My brain is pretty useless in the evenings, when it comes time for retention. And I learned that.
I don't admit anything. I
I
know
was
nothing
waiting
of
for
what
you
you're
to say
talking about.
something about this. David is laughing because we record the podcast in the evenings, and sometimes the things that come out of my mouth just do not make sense. But
Thank
really
goodness for editing.
reiterate, it's so important to allocate specific study times, in my opinion, because like I said, mornings are my best time. So that's when I really tried to make sure I put time aside for studying. And that's how I was efficient with my studies. That and another really, really big thing that I want to really make sure you guys are focusing in on is do not have your cell phones near you while studying. That I would waste so much time studying because I would do 10, 15 minutes of work and be like, all right, phone break, take my phone out and just be like, I'll do a quick scroll. That quick scroll on Instagram just turned into 30 minutes on my phone. So I would actually put my cell phone in a separate room while I was studying. So that way, if I wanted to go look at my phone, I had to intentionally get up, go get my phone, and then look on it. And I realized by doing that, I would get such a productive 1 to 2 hours of studying. And then I would actually give myself like a well-deserved phone break, you know? So I found that really beneficial, or at least putting your phone on do not disturb while studying. So that way, maybe you're not just looking at it every time you get a notification if you have a little bit more self-control than me, where I was like, nope, I know I need to put my phone in an entirely separate room. You know yourselves, hold yourselves accountable, try to make sure you're not just scrolling on your phone unnecessarily to focus in on that quality time. What about you, David?
I think that that's so important. I actually used to set the phone away from my bed when it came time to sleeping. So studying, I had to do that too, but especially with sleeping, because how many of us, when we're in bed and we just scroll through our phone, and that could keep you awake and awake and awake. And that alone, I would keep my phone to the other side of the room. But also for getting me out of the bed in the morning, I would keep it to the other side of the room because I needed to wake up in the morning. So I think that is so important. And I think it's even more important, micro studying, studying the small tidbits. So that's like doing short, focused bursts of studying, which is going to help you out a lot on your clinical rotations. So a lot of people that may be listening to this, maybe you're in your clinic rotations. So micro study. So while you're in the clinic, have your index cards with you. Take a quick break. You can focus on maybe you can listen to a podcast episode during a quick break or something like that. Have the phone app open for Final Frontier, something like that, where you can just quickly take 5 minutes, review, and then get back to what you were doing. How did you used to take any micro breaks?
It's funny you mentioned micro breaks because that's actually something I think I really struggled with because I normally was big into like 3 hour blocks while studying. And that was when I was at home. The part that you brought up about like using micro study breaks while in the clinic, while on your jobs, on a quick lunch break, I would incorporate that while I was working, and I found that beneficial, like when I was on the go, by using different apps or flashcards that I had. But when I was at home, I personally didn't benefit from microbursts of studying. I benefited better by saying, like, I'm doing 8 to 12 a.m. studying. Then I'm taking a 1 to 2 hour break. Then I'm doing like 3 to 6 p.m. studying. And then that's how I more so broke up my studying because for me, as a student, I only would finally get in the groove after like an hour, and then I was good for another hour or two before I started to feel like symptoms of like burnout or, just memory fog and not really retaining things anymore. I noticed at home when I first started studying, if I only studied for like a burst of 30 minutes and then I took another break, it was harder for me to get back into the swing of it. So I think, like you said, David, it just depends on where you are and what you need out of that moment. So for me, micro studying was really only beneficial outside of my home, but within the home, I benefited better from longer durations of studying. What about you?
I agree. I think when I was inside of the home, I did a lot better than when I was outside of the home. And that week before the examination, you do not want to have any distractions. So I think that's huge for keeping focus and huge for continuing forward with your studies, especially with that week.
Yeah, and something else to bring up that you actually just mentioned. I noticed sometimes if I would try to do microbursts of studying, like if I had a really rough day in the clinic or a really rough day when I was working, and on my lunch break, I was like, "Ugh, I got to get in my 30-minute micro session. I got to be looking things over." But I was already overwhelmed from what was going on outside of studying. It was not beneficial for me to be studying at that time. And it's okay to have, a microburst session planned on your lunch break. And by the time you get to your lunch break, you're like, I really just need a mental recharge and I need some time to just decompress. So use those microbursts when you are feeling energized, you're feeling good. But on days where maybe you need that lunch break to just focus on you, that's okay as well. That's also very beneficial for your studies. So don't be afraid to make adjustments as needed. And within that, I think I really would like to touch on a point of burnout because that is something that many of us struggle with. So it's really important to be mindful of signs that you're nearing burnout instead of letting yourself get to the point of burnout. So, David, do you want to touch about maybe some signs that you've noticed, whether it's students or that you've struggled with, some warning signs of burnout?
Oh, yeah. I think that recognizing burnout for yourself is so important. Some things that you can recognize is your level of fatigue. Maybe you're starting to fatigue a lot quicker than maybe you used to. You're becoming more irritable with your friends and your family members. Maybe something that wouldn't make you snap as quickly is starting to really just get to you. You got to recognize that your motivation, maybe it's just not there anymore. And maybe your effectiveness of the studying, where to the point where you may have the book open, but you're not actually retaining that information. You just have it open and you're just being miserable sitting there.
Yeah,
Is there anything?
something I want to touch on about that is you mentioned some really great ways to recognize burnout, I think in the big picture, but a big way I recognized burnout in the moment of studying was I mentioned, right, that I would like to do more like 2 to 3 hour blocks. So let's say I'm thinking I'm in that 8 to 12 a.m., that 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. block, and it's only like 11. If I realize I just read my same page of notes 2 times and it's just not sticking, I am reading the same thing over and over again. I'm not retaining it. I'm starting to second guess myself, even though it's a topic I normally can be, moving a little bit quicker with. I'm getting up and I'm taking a break. Even if I allotted that 3 hour study window, going back to that point of quality studying, right? We want to be effectively studying. Make those adjustments. Be flexible, like you mentioned previously. Quality studying, flexible studying, taking that taper, taking rest breaks as needed. These are all some really great ways to avoid burnout and recognize when we need to take some extra rest breaks.
I agree. I think that's so important. And there's a few more things that you definitely want to be doing as you head into this examination. So, something that could help out, review those rationales, practice questions. You've taken all those practice exams for a reason. Review the rationales. If you have flashcards, like we mentioned before with the micro studying, utilize those flashcards for that last week. Go through the ones that especially that you're having difficulty with. Sleep. Get at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Don't study past midnight, 1 a.m. I don't know how many episodes me and Emily have done where we've spoken about sleep and the importance of it. I mean, you need to get your sleep before this examination. Make sure that you know the logistics of that exam day as well. You don't want to be caught off guard. So you want to have your primary ID, your secondary ID, your clothing. You want to have your snack ready, a drink ready. You want to know where that prometric center is. Last thing you want to do is get lost on the way to your examination, because that's not going to be fun. And also stay consistent. During that last week as you head into this examination, now is not the time to start trying something new. Maybe it's medication. Maybe it's a certain drink. Maybe it's coffee. Whatever it can be, now is not the time. Stay consistent with your routine and your meals and what you've been doing. What do you think, Em?
Yeah, I think all of that is just so important. And the most important thing is do trust this process and don't compare yourself to others. Everybody is going to have their own road to success leading up to the exam. And it can be helpful to talk to maybe other students or your peers to help get maybe some insight or get some ideas on how you can better prepare yourself. But just because somebody else is doing something that works for them, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work or be best for you. So, you know, something to keep in mind is you've worked so hard to get to this point and you've been studying for countless years. Trust yourself. You know what works for you. But the one thing that we will mention that will not work for you, that does not work for anybody, is do not study the day before your exam. I cannot reiterate that enough. It is so important to give yourself that day to recharge. So you can take your own creative license and prepare in any way you want besides that. You cannot study before the exam.
I agree with you. And it's funny because both me and you are opposites with that too. You know me well enough. I shouldn't have, but I did. I did study the day before, but there's a big but there. So, but the thing is, I gave myself a cutoff time. I needed to, but I gave myself a cutoff time and I said at 3 p.m. or 2 p.m. After that, that's it. Done. No more. Just because I know that if I didn't, my anxiety was going to go through the roof.
Okay, I have to be honest.
Do it.
Maybe I lied a little. Okay, not that I lied, but now that I'm thinking back, you mentioned the cutoff. I realized I did give myself an hour in the morning because there were a few outcome measures I kept always just making silly mistakes on. So I said, here is my 1 hour. I remember specifically, I said, here is my 8 to 9 a.m. window. You are only allowed to rewrite these outcome measures that you always mess up. And after that, you are not allowed to do anything else. So now that I think back, I did give myself a 1 hour window, but it was a well-structured, planned hour, and I moved on.
I agree. It has to be, if you're going to do that, it has to be well structured. You got to know exactly what you're going in there to do. Like with you, it was the scales. With me, it was actually the scales too and everything. You need to know if you are going to do that, you got to know exactly what you are doing. You don't want to touch upon everything. It's okay. Like what Emily said, you got to trust yourself. You've went through so much already. It's okay. You got this.
Yep.
So now that you heard our podcast, here is a quote from Tim Ferriss. It's not about working harder. It's about working the right way. You all just heard about how to work the right way. It's not about working harder, putting in more hours, more time, working until you're sweating and you're tired and you're fatigued. No, that is not the way. You're going to get your dream. Trust yourself. Take it easy on yourself. You are powerful. You are strong. You are a Final Frontier warrior. You will pass.
Thank you very much for listening. For more information on the NPTE Final Frontier, please visit npteff.com. NPTEFF.com. You can also check out all of our social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and X.
Till next time, have a great day and a powerful tomorrow.